activities of intellectuals, circulation of ideas and texts, teaching in schools, production of school textbooks were all part of this process of the constitution of the nation, the fashioning of people's identity. That is, pedagogues, educationists, schools were complicit, are part of that process of the making of the national identity. This process involved the effort to erase cultural heterogeneity, plurality, and difference that existed prior to the forging of the nation. The hegemonic social, and that's my point, the hegemonic social and linguistic identities within each nation emerged by displacing local, repressing diversity, with educators and pedagogues participating in the process, underlining the premises of unity rather than diversity, unity rather than plurality. The question of diversity and plurality thus appears in the life of a nation, I would like to argue, in different historical conjunctures in two distinct ways. At the time of nation making, the plural is repressed to constitute the homogeneous national, the unified national. At the time of globalization, that is today, in the last few decades, the plural returns to haunt this idea of the homogeneous national. It comes as a specter haunting the nation and the national homogeneous national identity. We see two distinct responses to the challenge. One persuades the nation to reinvent itself by opening up, empathizing with plurality, confronting the social question it poses. The other, which is the right-wing reaction, seeks to insulate the nation, close its door in a paranoid response to the threat of diversity. A democratic culture, I would like to argue, democratic culture and society can only be built by opening up and creatively negotiating the challenges that diversity poses. This, to me, appears to be the founding premise of the project, Stories in Motion. In developing the textbooks, we felt it necessary in India to understand how diverse social groups within the nation had been marginalized in the writing of history textbooks earlier, and how they had been peripheralized in the imagination of the nation itself to constitute a democratic national memory, one that recognizes the value of diversity and plurality. We felt it necessary to unpack the different layers of marginalization and to think of ways in which the history of marginalized groups could be integrated in our textbooks. In 2006, when we took up the challenge, some of us in India were asked to produce a new set of textbooks for school children. An enlightened educationist, Krishna Kumar, had become the director of the National Council of Educational Research and Training that had the charge of producing model textbooks. Kumar was critical of the pedagogic assumptions underlying the existing school textbooks and underlying school education in India, and was enthusiastic, extremely enthusiastic about carrying on a radical change. For over a year, hundreds of us, university school teachers, educationists, NGO activists gathered at NCRT, that is the National Council of Education Research and Training, that had the charge of producing model textbooks for school children. Developing a critique of the textbooks we felt was necessary in order to define the way that our own textbooks could be outlined and developed. 25 years had passed since these books had been written, scarred by the violence of the partition riots of the 1947, when thousands of Hindus and Muslims killed each other. Intellectuals of 1950s and 60s, that is the generation which taught us in the 70s and 80s, that generation wanted to create an India which was democratic and social. And they wanted the social body, the national body, to be one where the differences between religious and ethnic communities were erased, and people saw themselves as democratic citizens of a new state. So secular nationalists wanted to think of Indians as individual citizens, not religious subjects, not fragmented into plural, diverse communities, they all collectively worked for the national future, people in the country. Communal histories that the sectarian religious histories they were critiquing had split Indian society into hostile communities, warring against each other. And this had to be critiqued and this had to be displaced. The focus was not to be on differences within the nation, but on the essential unity, not on heterogeneity and plurality but of the social, but on the homogeneous national. By the end of the 1980s and through the 1990s in India and elsewhere, historians were posing new questions and new ways of becoming, writing history. They're becoming critical of frames through which history was earlier conceived. Gender history had made historians aware that all narratives needed to be gendered, that masculinity and femininity are historically constructed, that men and women do not experience change in the same way, and that women could not be erased from history. Ecological histories had made us sensitive to the fact that histories are shaped by environment, that the developments that we perceive as progress have environmental consequences, and the different social groups who live in diverse ecological contexts, forest dwellers, tribals, pastoralists, fishermen, boatmen, have a history that we should be sensitive to. History is not just about big events, it's also about small people, small events, everyday life. That different social groups have their own specific frames of reference, their own ways of seeing and thinking, and historians should be sensitive to the way that different groups actually make sense of the world. Children had to be sensitive to the question of understanding other people, other worlds, other experiences. We could not simply add the history of the marginalized groups into the existing meta-narrative of the nation, adding chapters, sections, boxes, additional information within a structure which is already given, within a structure which we were teaching the children. This would only reaffirm the practice of exclusion, for the marginalized will inevitably appear as an appendage, as supplement, as peripheral. They would be absent even in their present. We are integrating them, but we are seeing them in the textbook in a way which is where they don't become central actors of the past. So we felt that we needed to focus on both the dominant and the subordinate, the victor and the victim, the elites and the plebs, the national and the local, the center and the periphery, the powerful and the marginal, as co-constituting, together constituting the history of the past and the present. They were not, one was not more important than the other. We had widened to bring in the social groups and classes that were very often not visible in earlier textbooks. For instance, I'm just giving you example from these two textbooks. We had two full chapters, one on forest society and colonialism, and the other one pastoralism and modern society. And we, just to give you a feel of the textbooks, the two chapters, pastoralist in a modern world, it moves from India to Indonesia and other places. Pastoralism in Africa then is covered through a focus on the Maasais here. In each of them, you can see there are oral texts, there are sources, there are various things integrated to give students a feel of the experience of the people who are part of this modern world and how they confront and negotiate that world. Forest society and forest and colonialism looks at the way forest societies change, how people live there, how people confront their problems, and how people adapt to the modern world. And this adaptation to the modern world becomes very critical to understand how they, in the act of adapting to the modern world, are also constituting the modern. They are not just simply marginalized, they are not just peripheralized. It is historians and social scientists who have peripheralized them, but actually they are they are co-constituents of the modern world, and we need to recognize that, and students have to see it and feel it and understand it. And we have recounted many ethnographic accounts to say what they have heard from their parents. So ethnographers and historians have gone and collected the material, and we've used those material to say what really happened. Records exist, narratives exist, sources exist. We have to look for them. we look for them only when we create a space in which their voices matter. From class 6 onwards, we are introducing sources, a variety of sources, from ethnographic accounts to ancient texts, to literary texts, to poetry, to official archival sources, to archaeological records for ancient period, to police records, to travelers' accounts, to other kinds of records which tell us anything to do with the past. Any trace of the past is part of the sources that we use, and it is there, and we try and introduce them and make them critically reflect on the source. The sources are not there to tell just the truth. This is what happened. We ask them, what are the biases of the source? How do you read them? Please think of the traveler who is written. What is his interest in presenting it in this way? So the source is queried, their problems are seen, and the critical comments are made on the sources to tell them how historians actually read and interpret. In modern period, we look at settlement reports, revenue records, we look at oral sources, we look at police sources, newspapers, journals, magazines. How do you read them, and what are the problems, and how we need to critically engage? So that is there, and we feel they need to understand, students need to understand that history is historians do not have an unproblematic access to the past. It is mediated by sources which have to be analyzed. Two kinds of challenges we immediately faced. Apart from the challenges, the pedagogic challenges we had, we immediately faced hostile opposition from authors, the earlier generation. And in fact, now it is for over a period of time, the history textbooks were very widely recognized. But at that time, there was a huge resistance to bringing in new textbook, as if this is going to threaten the nation itself. And so they were, we had to go up to the ministry. They called us because people were protesting, etc. Then there were also challenges from dominant castes and classes. That is, in India, I'm not sure how much you know about the caste system, but there are 3-4 orders, like the French orders. Here there is a rigid caste order, Brahmins, and to the Dalits, there are 3 or 4 Shudras, Vaishyas, Brahmins. So the Brahmins who dominated earlier, they have their associations. There are upper caste groups who have important space and place in it, because we gave so much oral evidence of the Dalits and lower castes about Brahmins and about their critique of society. We got challenges from the Brahmin associations that we are painting them in dark colors. We have to stop this. We have to change them. Lots of petitions and all. But we also got criticism from the lower castes and all, Dalits and marginalized groups, because they have their own sense of history. They have their own memories, their oral traditions. We had some of them, but we couldn't represent their oral tradition as truth. We represented them as stories that they say, or oral traditions which are there, which then we ask students to engage with. But they wanted their truth to be accepted centrally as part of the text. So their history of their past should become the history that we have about them. So that led to long political battles over several years with newspapers and other things, publishing articles about the criticism. So history in India immediately becomes an intense political conflict. It's a battleground for conflicts, and we had to face a lot of that. I would argue very emphatically that we cannot create a meaningful space for the other within the textbooks through a grudging recognition, a reluctant opening up under political pressure, in some sense, under the pressure. It cannot be based on prudent political calculation or an instrumental reasoning that we have to somehow get them in. It cannot be through an addition to existing structures of textbook. Any such pedagogic move will continue to marginalize the diverse, the plural, the other, even when seemingly integrating them within the text. Meaningful representation has to be based on empathy, understanding, genuine recognition, a reworking of the syllabus and the textbook, refiguring the framing narratives of history.
Ich fand es erstmal sehr spannend, dass Indien da an ganz ähnlichen Fragestellungen dran ist wie wir derzeit und dass sogar 2005 bis 2008 da Materialien produziert wurden, Schulbücher produziert wurden, die tatsächlich ein gutes Vorbild für uns sein können. Was ich besonders spannend fand an dem Vortrag von Neeladri Bhattacharya war, dass er Geschichte gesehen hat als Co-Konstruktion von dominanten und marginalisierten Perspektiven und auch dafür plädiert hat, Geschichte so zu erzählen. Also eben aus seinem Kontext heraus von Indien und dem Westen, von Stadt und von Land, von Frauen und von Männern, dass das quasi als neue Erzählung dann Geschichte sein soll. Und er hat ja gesagt, es geht eben nicht darum, jetzt zusätzlich ein paar Quellen von Marginalisierten additiv mit in Schulbücher reinzunehmen, sondern tatsächlich eine neue Erzählung zu schreiben. Und er hat ja auch nochmal darauf hingewiesen, dass die SchülerInnen eben im Klassenraum sitzen, also die Marginalisierten, die Angehörigen von benachteiligten Gruppen auch im Klassenraum sitzen und dass dementsprechend die Texte auch sensibel formuliert sein müssen, sodass die Personen sich da eben nicht zusätzlich verletzt oder ausgegrenzt fühlen durch die Art, wie Texte formuliert sind. Was mich auch noch so zum Nachdenken gebracht hat und wo ich mich gefragt habe, wie ist das eigentlich in den Schulbüchern aktuell? Er hat ja auch sehr stark dafür plädiert, diesen Fortschrittsmythos zu verlassen und nochmal kritisch zu gucken, welches Wissen wird eigentlich als wissenschaftlich relevant, wichtig erachtet und welches wird abgetan als unwissenschaftlich primitiv, irrelevant. Und in Indien hat man dann ja sehr selbstbewusst unter seiner Moderation tatsächlich auch marginalisierte Perspektiven reingenommen, wo dann von bestimmten landwirtschaftlichen Praktiken berichtet wurden, die sich als extrem ökologisch herausgestellt wurden und vorher als primitiv abgetan wurden.
Wir wollen jedenfalls, dass sich alle Schülerinnen und Schüler in unseren Bildungsmedien wiederfinden und sich eben auch gemeint fühlen. Deswegen nehme ich eben viele Anregungen mit, aber noch keine fertigen Antworten. Und es ist immer wieder ein Ringen mit Autorinnen und Autoren und gemeinsame Überlegungen, wie man es umsetzt. Aber wir haben viele Überlegungen aus diesem Projekt auch schon umgesetzt, deutlich gemacht, dass Geschichte nicht eine Perspektive hat, dass wir Perspektiven nebeneinander stellen. Also diese Überlegungen schlagen sich in unseren Bildungsmedien nieder.
Die Antworten sind nicht in allen Ländern gleich, sodass wir voneinander lernen können. Wir sehen, dass die Probleme in Bezug auf den Gebrauch und Missbrauch von Geschichte sehr ähnlich ist. Die Referenzen sind aber unterschiedlich, weil sie sich auf verschiedene historische, geografische und politische Kontexte beziehen. Aber wir können beobachten, dass überall die Art und Weise, wie man das Profil der eigenen Nation definiert, Gegenstand lebhafter und widersprüchlicher Debatten ist. Gemeinsam müssen wir darüber nachdenken, wie wir den Geschichtsunterricht aus dieser Polarisierung, aus der Kristallisierung von Identität, aus einer hegemonialen, exklusiven, antidemokratischen Konzeption der Nation herausführen können. Heute müssen wir sie neu gestalten, um im Lichte der aktuellen Herausforderungen über die Zukunft nachzudenken und unseren pluralen Identitäten einen tragfähigen Rahmen zu geben. Also es scheint mir besonders wichtig zu sein, darüber nachzudenken, wie man Lehrpersonen besser darin ausbilden kann, über die im Geschichtsunterricht behandelten Themen, Erinnerung und Konflikt zu reflektieren. Und darüber müssen wir gemeinsam nachdenken. Also deshalb ist der internationale Vergleich nötig.